It is therefore ordered that you shall be put to death by electrocution in the method prescribed by law.
The youngest woman ever sentenced to death in Tennessee.
Mr. Bates, take Mrs. Pike into the doctor.
Can I please have my mom before I go?
Mr. Bates, please hold Miss Pike in the doctor.
1995. Christa Pike was 18 years old and enrolled at the Job Corps in Knoxville, Tennessee. It was supposed to be a second chance, a place to learn a trade, start over. Instead, it became the stage for something unthinkable. Christa had a boyfriend, Tadarill Shipp, young, intense, attached to her. But when 19-year-old classmate Colleen Slemmer entered the picture, everything changed. Christa was somehow convinced Colleen was trying to steal him. Christa didn't confront Colleen directly. She planned. With the help of another student, Shadala Peterson, she planned something. A grand idea she had. It was to lure Colleen somewhere isolated, somewhere no one would hear her. An abandoned steam plant near the University of Tennessee campus, and execute what they wanted. January 12, 1995. The four of them signed out of their dormitory together. Christa, Tadarill, Shadala, and Colleen. But well, we know that only 3 would come back. Colleen was told they just wanted to make peace, to talk, to share marijuana and clear the air. It sounded harmless, but when they reached the wooded area near the abandoned building, the mood changed. What happened next lasted around 30 minutes. Colleen was attacked, taunted, hurt, terrorized. The violence escalated. She was struck repeatedly, cut. A pentagram, only shown "Don't Speak" symbol, was carved into her chest. It became ritualistic, controlled, deliberate. Shadala stood nearby as lookout. Tadarill joined in, and Christa led it. In the end, Christa picked up a large piece of asphalt and struck Colleen in the head. The blow was fatal, and it didn't stop there. Christa removed a small fragment of her skull and kept it. Not out of panic, not out of shock, but almost like a trophy, because that's what she felt, that she has won the battle. Within 36 hours, it was over. Students noticed Colleen hadn't returned. The dormitory log showed all 4 had signed out together, but only 3 signed back in. Police searched Christa. The bone fragment was found in her jacket pocket. She had been showing it to people, bragging, like, how do you think people would react? When questioned, Christa confessed. She admitted to the torture and the killage, but she claimed they only meant to scare Colleen, that things got out of control. The most cowardly excuse one could ever give. That explanation is obviously hard to sit with, because for 30 minutes there were choices, and every choice moved in one direction. Years later, Colleen's mother would beg the state to return her daughter's remains for proper burial. Authorities refused while the case remained legally open. Even in death, the pain stretched on. Jealousy, rage, control, and a decision made in the woods that can never be undone. But how does someone become this insecure, this angry, this ready to destroy over a relationship? People are not born with that level of chaos inside them. Then, where did it start? Well, Christa Pike's life began in instability. It was not always sunshine and rainbows. Her parents, Carissa Hansen and Emil Glenn Pike, had a relationship that swung between extremes. They married young, divorced after infidelity, remarried after a suicide attempt, then separated again. It was not a quiet home. It was a home filled with conflict, emotional swings, and unpredictability. Family members later described neglect that was hard to ignore. As a baby, Christa was left crawling through filth inside the house. Her mother struggled with heavy drinking. Even after doctors warned that Christa was suffering from severe seizures as a toddler, but the instability never stopped. There was no steady rhythm to her childhood, no consistent safety. Her paternal grandmother stepped in often. She cared for Christa when others didn't, fed her, watched her, protected her in the small, everyday ways that matter more than people realize. Christa later believed that this grandmother was the only person who truly loved her. When a child clings to just one source of comfort, that bond becomes everything. And when that bond disappears, the world feels like it's collapsing. In 1988, when Christa was 12, her grandmother died. After that, she attempted to take her own life. Twist. It wasn't her first attempt. In 3rd grade, she had already tried to overdose on medication. She was just a child. She received psychiatric treatment. Therapy came and went, but treatment can't fix an environment that stays unstable. Imagine growing up constantly afraid of being left, of not being enough, of love disappearing overnight. That kind of fear doesn't just fade with age. It turns into jealousy, possessiveness, a desperate need for control. This does not excuse what she did. Nothing excuses what happened in those woods, but understanding the roots of insecurity helps explain how emotions can spiral into something so much darker. By 18, Christa wasn't just jealous of her classmate Colleen. She was terrified of losing the one thing she believed gave her worth: her boyfriend. And when fear mixes with anger and no one steps in to stop it, things fall out, or rather explode. What happened in those woods was a choice. And when the truth came out, people were stunned. Students at Job Corps couldn't believe it. Teachers were in disbelief. Parents were horrified. The idea that a teenage jealousy could end in something so brutal felt unreal. The shock quickly turned into something else: accountability. Christa Pike, Tadderell Shipp, and Shadola Peterson were all charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Shipp had turned 17 just 2 months before the crime. Because of the severity of what happened, he was tried as an adult. Peterson chose to cooperate with prosecutors. She agreed to testify. In exchange, she pleaded guilty to being an accessory after the fact and received probation. But for Christa, the stakes were higher. Prosecutors announced they would seek the death penalty. This was no longer just a tragic case of teenage violence. This was now a capital murder trial. Inside the courtroom, the evidence spoke loudly. The dormitory's sign-out log, the fragment of bone found in Christa's jacket pocket, her own confession to police. She admitted to the attack. She admitted it went too far. She repeatedly claimed they only meant to scare Colleen, but for 30 minutes, the violence continued. On March 22, 1996, the jury deliberated for only a few hours. Guilty on both counts: first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder. 8 days later, the sentence came down: death by electrocution. She was 18 when the crime happened. She became the youngest woman in Tennessee history to be sentenced to death. In January 1997, Shipp was also found guilty. The jury could not unanimously agree on a sentence of life without parole. So the judge stepped in, describing him as dangerous, and sentenced him to life with the possibility of parole, plus an additional 25 years for conspiracy. That structure meant he would not even be considered for release until much later in life. As of October 2025, he has been denied parole. But Christa Pike remains on death row. After the guilty verdict, the legal battle didn't end. And at one point, it took a turn no one expected. Christa Pike began the appeals process in Tennessee state courts. Then she stopped it. Then she restarted it. In June 2001, and again in June 2002, she did something shocking. Against the advice of her own lawyers, she asked the court to drop her appeals entirely. She requested to be executed by electrocution. It's hard to imagine that moment. A young woman on death row asking the state to move forward with her execution. Criminal court judge Mary Beth Leibowitz granted the request. An execution date was set: August 19, 2002. For a brief period, it looked like it was really going to happen. Then she changed her mind. On July 8, 2002, her defense team filed a motion to continue the appeals process. That motion was denied at first, but on August 2, 2002, just weeks before the scheduled execution, a three-judge state appeals panel ruled that the process should continue. The execution was halted. The waiting resumed. In December 2008, Pike requested a new trial. That request was denied. She was returned to death row. With that decision, her state-level appeals were officially exhausted. But the case wasn't over. In May 2014, her attorneys took the fight to federal court. They argued three main points: that she received ineffective assistance of counsel, that she suffered from mental illness, and that the way Tennessee administers capital punishment is unconstitutional. In March 2016, U.S. District Judge Harry Sandlin Mattis Jr. issued a 61-page ruling. All arguments were rejected. The death sentence stood. In August 2019, the United States Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit unanimously upheld that decision. Relief denied. Years passed differently on death row. Appeals, rejections, motions, and in the middle of it all, a woman who once asked to die, then asked to live. Death row is meant to be a place of waiting. Locked doors, narrow routines, time moving slowly. But in August 2001, violence followed Christa Pike inside prison walls. On August 24, 2001, Pike attacked a fellow inmate named Patricia Jones. The weapon was a simple shoestring. Pike attempted to strangle Jones and nearly succeeded. Jones herself was serving a life sentence for a 1994 murder in Knoxville. Prison is filled with people who have already committed serious crimes. But even there, this attack stood out. Investigators believed another inmate, Natasha Cornett, may have helped Pike. The Tennessee Department of Corrections stated that Cornett allegedly assisted. However, after reviewing the evidence, officials concluded there was not enough proof to formally charge her. Pike acted alone in the eyes of the court. In 2003, she was convicted of attempted first-degree murder for the attack. She received an additional 25-year sentence. Think about that. Already on death row. Already sentenced to die. And still, another act of extreme violence. For many watching the case, this incident reinforced something chilling. The crime in 1995 was not a single, isolated explosion of jealousy. It suggested a deeper pattern, a capacity for violence that did not disappear once she was locked away. Prison is meant to separate danger from society. But sometimes, it reveals who someone truly is when there is nothing left to lose. Death row is supposed to be the end of the road. But in 2012, investigators uncovered something that shocked even prison officials: an escape plan. And, at the center of it, Christa Pike. It began, strangely enough, with letters. Around early 2011, a man named Donald Kohut from New Jersey started writing to Pike. He was in his early 30s, a personal trainer, someone with no obvious connection to her past. At some point, the letters turned into visits. By July 2011, Kohut was driving nearly 1,700 miles round trip from Flemington, New Jersey, to Nashville, Tennessee, once or twice a month, to see her. Somewhere along the line, the idea of escape entered the conversation. Details remain limited because of security concerns. But court documents later revealed a horrific outline. A prison key traced. A duplicate would be created. And they wouldn't do it alone. A corrections officer named Justin Heflin allegedly agreed to help in exchange for money and gifts. A prison employee, trusted with guarding inmates, allegedly willing to help a death row inmate walk free. Early in 2012, prison personnel received information about the plot. What followed was a joint investigation involving the Tennessee Department of Corrections, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, and the New Jersey State Police. The plan, according to the TBI, was not far along. Officials later stated that the escape was not imminent, but it was real enough to trigger arrests. In March 2012, Donald Kohut was arrested and charged with bribery and conspiracy to commit escape. Justin Heflin was arrested and charged with bribery, official misconduct, and conspiracy to commit escape. Christa Pike, however, was not charged in connection to the plot. Investigators stated it was unclear whether she actively participated beyond being aware of the plan. On May 31, 2012, Kohut was sentenced to 7 years in prison to be served in Tennessee. Heflin cooperated with authorities. He did not serve prison time, but he was terminated from his position. And Pike? She remained on death row, still waiting. From jealousy in the woods, to a courtroom sentence, to an attempted prison break involving a guard and a man who drove across states for her. After decades of appeals, delays, and legal battles, the story of Christa Pike is reaching its final chapter. On August 27, 2020, the Tennessee Attorney General's office officially requested the state Supreme Court to set an execution date for Pike. But the world was changing. The COVID-19 pandemic swept through Tennessee, slowing courts and creating delays. Pike's attorneys were granted extensions, allowing them more time to argue why she should not be executed. The state did not oppose these extensions. Time stretched. The legal system moved slowly, as it often does in death penalty cases. Then, on June 7, 2021, Pike's attorneys filed a motion to oppose the execution date and request a certificate of commutation. Their motion was denied. It seemed as though every avenue had been exhausted. Because before November 2022, Pike had used every appeal, every motion, every procedural tool the system allowed. But law can shift unexpectedly. In November 2022, Tennessee's Supreme Court found that the state's law automatically sentencing juvenile offenders to life without parole was unconstitutional. This was known as the State versus Booker case, a ruling with profound implications for young offenders. Pike's lawyers saw a slim, last chance. On August 30, 2023, they used the ruling to attempt reopening her bid to overturn her 1996 conviction and death sentence. Their argument leaned heavily on her age, at the time 18, and her documented history of mental instability. They argued that these factors should spare her from execution, but the court disagreed. In October 2023, Knox County Criminal Court Judge Scott Green denied the request. He clarified that the 2022 Supreme Court ruling applied only to juvenile offenders. Pike, legally an adult at the time of her crime, did not qualify for the protections outlined in Booker. Years of delay, years of appeals, and now the system has firmly drawn the line. On September 30, 2025, the Tennessee Supreme Court issued a death warrant for Pike. Her execution was officially scheduled for exactly 1 year later, September 30, 2026. If carried out, Pike will become the first woman executed in Tennessee in roughly 200 years. 2 centuries of history will intersect with one young woman's violent act decades earlier. It is hard to imagine the weight of that sentence, not just for Pike, but for everyone connected: the family of Colleen Slemmer, the victims behind bars, the correctional officers, and even Pike herself. The woods where it began are silent. The courtroom echoes with precedent. Death row is cold, empty, patient. And soon, after more than 30 years, the state will act. From a childhood marked by neglect, loss, and instability, to an impulsive, brutal crime born of jealousy, to decades of legal maneuvering and life behind bars, the end is now set. September 30, 2026. A life defined by choices, consequences, and the long shadow they cast. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments section below.